I'll do a quick introduction. There's that cliche that she needs no introduction. I think Chitra does, because I think a lot of people may not know the range and scale of her achievements and also about her work beyond writing. So we only know of her as a writer, but there's many more facets to Chitra, which I've also discovered as I was doing my research. So Chitra Divakaruni is an award-winning writer, activist, professor, and speaker, and the author of 21 books, which include Mistress of Spices, Sister of My Heart, Before We Visit the Goddess, Palace of Illusions, which I have right here, and The Forest of Enchantments, The Last Queen. Her newest novel is Independence, although her latest book, which is what we'll focus on today, is this one. Can you see it? An Uncommon Love. An Uncommon Love is the early life of Sudha and Narayan Murthy. Her work has been published in over 100 magazines and anthologies, including Atlantic, New Yorker, The Best American Short Stories, O.Henry Prize Stories, translated to 30 languages. Her work has been made into plays, films, and dance dramas. She's won the American Book Award, the PEN Josephine Miles Award, a Premio Scanno, a Light of India Award. In 2015, the Economic Times included her in their list of 20 most influential global Indian women. She is the McDavid Professor of Creative Writing and internationally acclaimed creative writing program in the University of Houston, and lives in Houston with her husband, Murthy. This is the more interesting part. Chitra has been an activist in the field of education and domestic violence, and has been closely associated with Pratham, which educates underprivileged children in India, Akshay Patra, which feeds Indian school children, and Daya and Maitri, which assists survivors of domestic violence. She also supports the Houston Food Bank. So I think it's very appropriate that Chitra is at the FDC, because as you all know, you've made the donations. The FDC also supports the Chirag School. The Chirag School is also a non-profit school, which is run on the lines of J. Krishnamurthy's philosophy. And the more important thing is that it's a village school. The fees is 150 rupees. It's run by village teachers. The village kids go there. It's a Hindi medium school, and yet it delivers some beautiful learning and extremely good results. And my own children, when we moved to the mountains, studied there for my daughter for 3 years and my son for 4. And I think it has really helped them be more grounded and more Indian in many ways than being in a big urban school. So thank you so much for making the time for this session, Chitra.
My pleasure.
It's absolutely a pleasure to have you. My first question is, you're basically a fiction writer, and then suddenly we have now, this is your first book of nonfiction, I would assume, yes?
Yes.
So what led to this, and how easy or difficult was that?
Well, I have to say that the driving force in getting me interested in writing this book was Chiki Sarkar, who is the head of Juggernaut, and she called me. I knew her from the time when she was at Penguin, and she called me and she said, "I have a great book idea. I would love for you to write about the lives of this couple." And of course, I had known about Sudha Murthy and Narayan Murthy for many, many years. And she said, I'd love for you to write about them, because people don't know about their early life. And it would be kind of fun as well as inspiring, perhaps, for young people, people who are following their dreams, people who are maybe going through difficulties, people who just want to know how to balance career and marriage. So at first I said, no, I don't know about writing nonfiction. And then Chiki said, well, they would really be interested in having you write their story. And they've said no to everyone else that I've suggested, but they have read your books, including Palace of Illusions. And so they would feel comfortable if you write the story. So then, of course, yes, I have to say, my ego was touched by that. And Chiki said all the right things. So I decided. And then I said, okay, let me think about it. And then my husband Murthy also encouraged me. He said, first of all, he said, it's good for you to grow in a new direction. But he also said, this couple, unlike many people who have made it and are very successful, They have really lived a life of values, and they have also dealt with many difficulties in their lives. And truly, it would be inspiring for other people to know about them. And also, you would be able to show the human part of their story, which probably people who know them only after their success just have no idea about. So all of
Yeah,
these things. And then as I started reading more about them and doing the research, I thought, really, yes, it's a story worth telling, and it's a story worth reading.
that's true. Absolutely. In fact, it's interesting that you said that it humanizes legends. That was one of my questions, is that it really does humanize the legends, because what you normally get to hear about is, they're very rich and they have this crazy life. They don't have this crazy lifestyle, but they have these huge reputations. Sudha as a writer, and after you reading, you realize that they are actually just, they weren't always rich. They had to make difficult choices, and they were often guided by lofty idealistic principles, which many people would call impractical, like, like Narayan Murthy refusing to give any bribes, or just fighting with the bureaucracy for what he thought was right. So when you spoke to them, and actually, the visual that you have in the on the cover of the book and in the back of the book, I think are also very, very interesting, because I'm just going to go back here and try to share the screen. Just to, yeah, I'm just going to share the screen for just one moment. So if you look at these images, this is what you normally get to see, or you will get to see a more stern and, austere Narayan Murthy. Can you see the screen
I
with the
think
image
it's
of Sudha?
coming up. Yeah, it's come up.
Right? So this is
Yeah.
what we normally get to see. But this is the cover of the book, by the way. This is the cover of An Uncommon Love. But if you look at this image, this really, this is the dehumanizing. This is the back cover of the same book. And you look at the smile on Sudha's face, and you look at Narayan Murthy, he's like a young man, still with the signature thick glasses. And I think it's a really, that image is the book in just two pictures, because it really takes them off their pedestal. So they are such legendary people in their own right. So what was it like to interact with them, to get, to get to meet and know them as people, as
Well,
opposed to just these?
Well, I had a little bit of an advantage because I went to school with Sudha's youngest brother.
Oh,
She only has one brother, her brother. And
sure.
we did our PhD at the University of California at Berkeley. So I had first, no, and this is many, many years back. This is, over 30 years back,
Sridhar,
40
right?
years almost. So it's like they were not rich and famous at that time. So I knew
Oh,
them
okay.
first as just my friend's brother, brother-in-law and sister, and they were very nice. They were very pleasant. So we had that kind of relationship where I wasn't approaching them after they had become famous. We kind of knew each other a little bit, although we hadn't been in touch. So I think there was trust on both sides, and they were just once they decided that they would write this book, they decided to be very honest about it. So
Okay.
it's not only a book about their, admirable moments, but it's a book about their challenging moments. It's a book
Yes.
about how they made mistakes, how they fought with each other, how they made up, how they dealt with, household problems, how Sudha often had to pick up the pieces because Mr. Murthy was just very busy. It's all of those things. How do you negotiate within a marriage to make things worse? What do you do when your husband suddenly, because he is so um, value driven, decides that you can't be part of the company because then it would become like one of those nepotistic family owned companies?
Yeah.
I think they had to make a lot of difficult decisions.
Yes.
And even
Yes.
towards the end of the book, when Infosys is taking off and there is a little more money, how then will you teach your children to grow up with the values that you grew up with of simple
Yeah.
living? So,
Yeah.
very nice challenges. of not only the, what shall I say, the professional life, but also family life, life as husband and wife, life as children, because they had a large, each one of them had a large family and many responsibilities. How do you handle that? And then as parents themselves, how do you handle that? But it also has some fun moments that people don't know about, like, how did they meet? How did he propose to her in the back of an auto rickshaw? Just some fun things. How in the beginning of their marriage, when he took some time off because his first venture was a failure. So he was at home some of the time, and how he became the house husband and would cook for Sudha when she came back from work. It's just really
I
fun.
remember that. All the women thought he was good for nothing. He was just staying at home, eating off of his wife's.
Exactly. Exactly. So he would go down to buy vegetables
Buy
from the
vegetables.
vegetable vendor, but he was never good at bargaining, so he would pay too much. And all the women in the neighborhood would be like, "You're just wasting your poor wife's money. There she is working all day, and you're just paying the vegetable seller whatever you want to pay him." There are some very nice, fun moments that
For me,
show the human side of them.
for me, the revelation also was when, the 11 months when he went trying to find the answer of capitalism versus communism. And then he went across on the Iron Curtain on the other side, and he had this crazy experience of being put in jail for 3 days.
Oh, yes.
I think
Without
so
food
that
and water. Without
without
food
food
and
and
water.
water, and in cold weather. So I had no idea that he had gone on this whole journey, and that he had done all this exploring. That was also very fascinating for me, because that's a facet that, again, unless you know him personally, that will never turn up in the
Exactly.
in the
Exactly.
mainstream media. But I did have, I must say, how it is with once you become a celebrity. And yes, no problem.
One moment.
Sure.
Yeah.
Once you become a celebrity, there's so much that goes on about you. It's in the press and everything, and a lot of people start dissing you. So when I started reading the book, I was also a bit of a skeptic, because there's these rumors float around about how celebrities are and stuff. But as I read more and more, I was amazed by who they are as people, their drive, their clarity, and how they stood by each other through so much that went on in their lives.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, when you got this project and you first said no, were you also skeptical, saying, I don't know about these people and I don't know? Or was it just that, you don't want to write a book like this? Or was it actually?
It
So
was
I
a
was wondering, did you have
combination.
that question?
It was a combination. First of all, my strength is fiction, or
Mm-hmm.
until this book has always
Yeah.
been fiction. So I didn't want to move into an area that I didn't know about. I had not been that interested in writing nonfiction, because one of
Right.
the fun things about writing fiction is you to make up everything. But of course, if I'm writing a life story, that cannot happen. That should not happen. I have to be very close to the truth. And so I was like, wait, but how will I make this original? How will I make it fun for the reader if I'm like tied down by facts? But I realized as I wrote this book that you can actually use a lot of fictional techniques even when you have facts, but the way you discuss something, or the way you create a scene, or the way you bring out character through what people say, just the dialogue or their gestures, that's very much like fiction. So I learned a lot of things about how to use fictional techniques even when writing nonfiction. And I think that that was good for my growth as a writer.
Sure. And so, do you think this
One
will
of the
change your
things,
fiction?
one of the things that we all agreed on right up front is that this book is to show them as complex human beings. So, there would be negative moments and positive moments. They're not just
Right.
moments that made them look good. And to their credit, they also said that is what we want. We want a chronicling of our lives with all the problems, so that others who may be starting off trying to build a business, or starting off in two-career family and are having problems can see themselves reflected in some of it.
Yeah. I completely see how it will be highly relatable to many people. So yeah, definitely. So my question was, now that you've written this book in nonfiction, do you think it will change how you write fiction in any way? Do you think it will impact that at all, or not really?
I think it will to some extent, because especially when I write my historical fiction and my mythological fiction, because there too there's already a story, right? There are lives. If for example, if I were writing Palace of Illusions all over again, obviously I have to research the Mahabharata, which I did, but I think now I've learned more about researching the source material and taking things from it so that there is truth, but also there is an opportunity for me to be, what shall I say, original, to still be original, to still be creative. So yes, I think with every book I learn something new.
So,
And that's what I
in
love
fact,
about writing.
it's interesting you mentioned Palace of Illusions, because I was just thinking about both the books, and it's very interesting because in both the books, sort of, we know what happens in the end. In the end, that Sudha and Narayan Murthy are still together, and Infosys becomes this highly valued business. In Mahabharata, we know exactly what happens in the end. And yet there is something about the narrative which keeps us engaged, which keeps us involved. I think for the Uncommon Love, it is more about um just understanding the inner lives of these people, which are otherwise just media figures for us. And in Mahabharata, it's the perspective which is so different. But did you also kind of see that, or did you have that in the back of your mind, saying people might
Yes.
already know? So yeah, how did that?
Once I started writing, once I created a plan, yes, that was very much there. I knew that I would be sticking to the facts. And then I thought, okay, what about these facts? What's behind the facts that people would not know? So
Right.
behind the facts are the feelings. Behind the facts are the way of thinking that made them act in one way versus another. Behind the fact is the understanding of how an actual incident led these people to make decisions. For example, you talked about how Mr. Murthy, when he was pretty young, he had not even met Sudha at that time. So he was working in France, and every summer he would travel around Europe. And so the final summer, no, this is now, by then this is winter, he's just about to come back to India, and he said, I haven't been to Eastern Europe, and I want to go to Eastern Europe, because he was very motivated by socialism. He was very motivated by the thought of equality
Yeah.
in society. But when he gets to Nice, when he gets to this Eastern European city that is communist ruled, he is just, for no reason, there's some situations which I hope people will look up in the novel, but really for no fault of his own, he is dragged off the train, he is taken by the police, he is thrown into a cell. It's just a concrete structure, and he almost freezes. They don't give him food, they don't give him water. He stays there for several days, and he's almost at the end of his rope when they actually take him out, and they've decided not to shoot him. They decide to put him on another train and send him back. So,
Yeah.
but first of all, people didn't know about that, but also, how did it affect him? It made him realize that that's not the kind of situation he would like to see in India, that kind of government that is dictatorial and where people don't have any rights. So he came back and he changed his whole political view, and he became what he himself calls a compassionate capitalist. So
Capitalist. Yeah.
yes, he wanted to become a success, but he wanted that success not to be just his own, but a success that many people could share in. So, I learned a lot of things about when they talked about those kinds of little incidents in their lives. And some things that I also talked to Sudha's siblings. So there
Mhm.
were some fun incidents that I had
Yes.
never known. And even she had kind of forgotten. But when they talked about it, she said, "Oh yes, I remember." And one is when she was a little girl, just about 8 years old, and she is going to school in Hubli, the small town. It's a kind of a rainy, cloudy, misty day, and she's going to school by herself with her umbrella. And this man comes out of the fog, as it were, and he tries to steal her gold earrings. He tries to like yank off her gold earrings. And if I had been in that place, I would have been screaming and crying and trying to run away. But Sudha Murthy, no, she takes her umbrella and she starts beating this man with the umbrella, and she starts shouting, "Thief, thief!" And he's so startled that he runs away. And I thought
Yeah.
stories like that are they were so interesting.
Precious.
But they
Yeah.
also showed something about the character.
Definitely. Definitely. Great. So we've already got like tons of questions in the chat. So we're going to do one little fun thing before we open up the chat questions. Okay. And you have to go with the flow on this. I'm going to ask you some questions. They're going to be very staccato, and don't think too hard. Just give the first answer that comes in the top of your mind. Okay.
Okay,
So
I'll try.
are we game? All right.
All right.
So first one, very simple. What's your favorite form? Novel, short story, nonfiction?
Novel.
Okay. Favorite activity? Teaching, writing, speaking in public?
Writing.
Okay, great. Favorite character from all of your 21 books? Which is the one character? If you had to pick one character, which would be your favorite?
Okay, this is very tough, but I'll pick Panchali in Palace of Illusions.
Perfect. Great one. All right. Now, rewind to the beginning of your writing career. What is the one thing you would do differently?
Differently?
Yeah.
I would not be so anxious about publishing. When I started writing, I was very anxious about publishing.
Okay.
And I would say, now I say to my students, just make that book the best book it can be. Publishing will happen if it's meant to happen.
Awesome. That's really great advice. And the last one, this is a little difficult, but let's say you're in a Nazi camp, okay, and you have 21 children, and the guard says you have to leave one child behind, okay? You have 21 books, so you have to drop one book. Which one book would you drop?
Well, just like in the Nazi camp, I would say, I'm sorry, I can't leave any children behind. You can kill me if you want.
Oh, okay, so every single one is equally precious. No favorite.
Everyone is my child.
Okay, cool. That's a good that's great. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to start going through the questions. We have a lot of questions already, but we are going to we're going to stick with the questions, not the compliments and the comments. So first is from Sumanya. She's saying, a big fan of Palace of Illusions. While writing a biography, how do you reconcile what to expect with what you encounter? Did you have any instances where the gap was wide and you had to consciously do something to bridge it?
Well,
Can you give
a
an
lot of
example?
times, that's a great question. A lot of times I had to push Sudhaji and Mr. Murthy a little bit. They would say, "Oh, this happened." And then I'd have to say, "But how did you feel about it? Or why did you make this decision?" Sometimes we just do things. We're not consciously thinking about why, or, it happens and we move on and we don't think of, well, how was I actually feeling? But for the book, those things were important. So I had to probe, I had to dig a little deeper. And what I was looking for is what I look for in fiction. What is the psychological reasoning behind my characters, why they're doing things? So, and I felt that even though this was nonfiction, it was really important for me to understand and for my reader to understand why these people did these things. And if they behaved in a certain way, or if they had conflicts within themselves, or if a decision was a difficult one, I needed to understand why for all of those things, because I thought my reader would have those questions and they would want to understand why.
So looking for deeper motives, looking for, going a little deeper than just what's on the surface.
Yes,
Nice.
and looking for the what shall I say, the difficult motives, not always the not always the quote unquote right ones. So
Sure.
sometimes there are things that are done through anger. There are sometimes things that are done because you don't want to face the consequences.
Sure.
And I wanted, so I really questioned them, and to their credit, they came through and they talked about those difficult moments.
Yeah, I can imagine, like, especially like with Narayan Murthy ji being the absentee father so often, and so Sudha having to make up for both of them and a lot of those
Yeah,
things.
and how did
So
she feel? Those
yes,
moments of loneliness, lying
yeah,
alone in the bed. It
yeah,
takes a lot of courage to open yourself up and allow those vulnerabilities to come out, right? So I
true,
really
absolutely,
admired the fact that they were willing to do that.
yeah,
And with Mr. Murthy, there were some very, I would say, powerful, painful moments that he had never talked about. And one of them was when his father hit him as a child. He hit
yeah,
him because the father was taking a nap. This boy, he was just a little kid. He was playing with a friend, making noise. Father woke up, got really angry, and just hit him so hard that he flew across the room and cut his forehead on the edge of a steel trunk. And even to share that with me, I think it took a lot of courage
yeah,
and
sure,
took a
I'm
lot of
sure.
opening himself up to vulnerability. And then, Sudha, he had told Sudhaji that incident, and she had asked him, what did you learn from that? And he said to her, and he said again to me, I learned that I should never hit a child like that. And that
Mm.
was just such a touching moment for me that he opened up. And this is true. Even when, and he did have a temper, he did get upset with his kids, but he never hit them.
That's great. That's
He
great.
did throw their toys across the room and break the toys, but he never hit them.
All right. Next question is from Swati. She says, "What was your process for the book, research and then writing it? How did you do those things parallelly or separately? And what was your daily pace of writing, like your schedule?"
It's a great question because first I did my own research. Then I got a bunch of questions. Then I started emailing the Murthys. These are my questions that I couldn't find the answers to elsewhere. And then they started sending me back answers. So all of this was happening on email. Then we started doing Zoom interviews because I wanted to go deeper into some of those answers. And then the final and most important part was when I went to Bangalore, and I stayed in Bangalore for quite a while, and I just spent all day with them, just, shadowing them, just asking questions. And this became more like storytelling. So I would sit there and they would think of things and they would say, oh, this is when this happened. Oh, I haven't talked about it yet. Let me tell you about the time when, so Sudha Murthy says, do you know that when we were dating, Murthy broke up with me? And then he would say, oh yeah, but I broke up with you because I was a communist, I didn't have any money, and you had such a bright future, I didn't want to mess you up. So we'd have these nice conversations out of which I got a lot of material and I could create scenes.
Great. The next question is where Ram is asked, the story of Infosys is inseparable from the story of the Murthy couple. So how easy or difficult was it for you to write about corporate aspects, considering you don't have a background in business?
Yeah,
And
that was
how did you
quite
approach it?
difficult. I had to ask a lot of questions. I had to do a lot of research, especially about computers, because I don't know that much about computers. I mean, I know something about computers now, but computers then were very
Yeah.
different. And what was a data center then is very different from what is a data center now. So I had to do a lot of research. Luckily, my husband has a background in science, and my children know a lot about computers, so they could also guide me and they could explain terms to me. And then the Murthy's son, Rohan, he was very useful. And he gave me
Oh,
a lot of answers and he gave me links to look at so that I could figure out the computer aspect. The other aspect where I had to do a lot of research is what were the laws in what was called the license Raj. You couldn't get anything done on your own until the government gave their stamp of approval. And oh my goodness, I was so respectful of Mr. Murthy after I found out he had to, just to get like his computer, his first major computer imported, he must have gone to Delhi like 100 times
Yeah, I know.
before they
Crazy.
would agree to just allow him to import a computer so he could do his work. And today, in the very free and open business scene in India, we can't even imagine that. And I think that's part of something that I wanted to share with people, because we so quickly forget history, and that is why I've been writing my historical novels like The Last Queen and Independence, which is about the 1800s, and then Independence is about the 1940s when India gained her freedom. We take these things so for granted, the very open business models right now, or the fact that most of us, I would say probably all of us today, were born into a free India, and we take it for granted. So, through my writing, I want to remind people
Great.
that the privileges we have today are not what people had earlier.
Absolutely. And I think, even when I was reading the license Raj, I was in shock. And I'm 53 and I've, been in the industry and I've been on the IT side of things. You never realize how difficult it would have been till you read the book. It doesn't strike you what it meant to have a license Raj. I mean, even the land that they're given, just buying a computer so hard, it's shocking in many ways. So next question is from Anna Kapoor. She says, how do you map out the book, and could you also share how you iterate on the structure and flow as you write a book?
Yeah,
And
well,
are you a plotter? Firstly, do you plot out your book first?
yeah, they say that there's two terms, right? One is the plotter, who writes everything and does outlines. The other is the pantser, who
Yeah.
just goes by the seat of the pants and decides things. And I think I really like being a plotter, but I know it doesn't work all the time. So at
Sure.
least the large movements of my books, I like to plot them out. And
Okay.
and that is why, and then I have to say, okay, these large movements are there and everybody knows them, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. In between, what can I put that makes my book original and different?
Right.
So again, going back to Palace of Illusions, everything in Panchali's life and Draupadi's life is just as it is in the Mahabharata. I haven't really changed much. I mean, there are some private moments when she's talking to her nurse and asking about her birth. Okay, the birth story is there in the Mahabharata, but I've created these personal scenes. So I like creating the plot. And in this case, that was very much a part of my pre-writing of An Uncommon Love, right? Because their lives, they were young, then they did this, then they did this, then they met, then they started Infosys. Sudha was working for Telco. All of this is already given to me in chronological order, right? So I had to decide, what am I going to do with this information that will present it most strikingly for the reader and yet keep it true. So I asked them, well, how did you fall in love? And they said, well, we used to spend a lot of time talking to each other. We'd go on these dates, we'd go to these cheap restaurants. Neither of them had money at that point. And we'd order like one little dish, and then we'd sit in the corner and just chat for a long time. And I said, well, what did you tell each other? And they said that, once we started trusting each other, we told each other the stories of our lives from the times when we were children. And so I have that scene in the book when they're sitting, and then the stories begin to come out, right? So, that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of my technique. The dramatic moment, and then what are we learning through that dramatic moment? Same with Panchali. We have the dramatic moment, but then we have her thoughts, which is what makes the book, I think, original, because I've really tried to think about how would Panchali feel when, her sari is being pulled away by the Dushasana. So we have the scene already, but we don't know what the people are feeling. Here also, we have the facts of the lives of the Murthys, but we don't know what they're feeling. So the facts are the outline, but the feelings are what I have created based on my understanding of the events in the outline.
Right. Okay, great. Next question was, what's your favorite book on the craft of writing?
One more time.
Your favorite book on the craft of writing?
On the craft of
I,
writing.
yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of really good books, but there's a book that I read a long time back, and it's called Bird by Bird by
And
Annie
Lamont.
Lamott.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
I really recommend that. It's very simple, it's very funny, it's very well written. But if you can get hold of that book, and now with the internet and ebooks, I'm sure you would be able to get hold of it. I learned a lot from reading that book. And she
Yeah,
made
it's
it
available in India. It's available in India on Amazon.
wonderful,
Yeah,
wonderful.
so you could easily get it.
I
In fact,
recommend
I think there might even be an Indian imprint because it's not that expensive. Great.
that.
Yes, that
Wonderful.
is a lovely book. Thank you.
It's an excellent
Um,
book
yeah, and fun to read as well.
and fun to read.
There's a question. I'm thrilled to meet you. Could you share some tips on overcoming writer's block? It's all in my mind, but writing it down is so hard.
Yes, yes. Writer's block. I too get it. I think all writers, at some point, they will get writer's block. And I have understood why I get writer's block. It's because I have not been able to imagine that portion of the story or the book as well as it needs to be imagined. I have not understood the character. I have not understood the motivation. I'm a very character-based writer. So unless I understand a character well, I can't go forward, because then it would be very shallow and I'd have to rewrite it. And, I hate doing that. I hate having to throw away chapters. So I would rather wait, stop, be clear about what I want this chapter to do, or the scene in a story. It doesn't matter if it's a longer piece or a shorter piece. So I do a lot of free writing. I do all my book composition on my computer. So I type everything into my computer. But when I'm stuck, I have notebooks. And in the notebooks, I will write by hand. And I'll just take one aspect of the character. Let's say, if it was Palace of Illusions, or my book on the Ramayana from Sita's point of view, Forest of Enchantments, I would say, okay, if Sita were just talking to me during this scene, what would she say was on her mind? So I create like a little dialogue, or more of a monologue, but it's like Sita's explaining to me how she feels. What is she upset about? Is she scared about something? Oh, does she have an idea to solve a problem? And so it's like I'm letting the character talk to me. And when I have and then I ask, let's say, Sita, well, if you do this, what do you think will happen? And then that helps me move forward with the plot. Okay, so that is something I do. That's number one. Number two, if that doesn't work, is I say, okay, I need a little break from reading, but it's not just any kind of break. It's a very focused break. What is the kind of scene I'm trying to write? Let me find an example from a writer that I admire. So let's say I am having a scene like where a husband and wife are having a fight, and I'm just not getting, the dialogue right. Then I go back and I recall good books that have shown me that kind of scene somewhat, and I read them. And that gives me a sense of, okay, how did this writer deal with it? So I read 2 or 3 of them and I'll get some ideas. And then when I go back to my writing, often things have cleared up. So note-taking, free writing, and using the works of other people. So I think these things have worked well for me, and they might work for you as well. All right, I have one third and final method of getting rid of writer's block. All right, so in my study, I have bookshelves, and in one of those bookshelves are the worst books I've come across. I know many people would give a lot of money to know what's on those books on that bookshelf, but hey, that's my secret. But so when I'm feeling really down, I randomly pick one of those books and I read a little bit in it, and I say to myself, if this person could finish this book and get it published, well, I can do it too. And that generally takes care of my writer's block.
That's really funny. That's inverting the whole way. I was thinking you're going to say, you have this inspiration place where you keep all of the top-notch writing, but you flipped that and you said, the worst, and I can do better than these guys. So that's really funny. Okay, cool. Um, the plotter pantser question's already been answered. There was another question saying, how do you organize your research? And especially like for Palace of Illusions and stuff, I'm sure there's a lot of research which has gone into it. So how do you organize that? How do you keep that at hand?
So, and this is true of all the books for which I've done research. I will, for the epics, of course, my primary research was the original epic. And a lot of people maybe don't know about this, but our epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and in fact our Puranas, have many versions of them. So
Yeah.
yes, there is Valmiki, but there are many centuries worth of great writers who have rewritten the story of Ram. So I have, and Sita. And so the first thing was I read all of them. So I read Valmiki, I even got the Sanskrit version with the translation so I could read it as close to the original as I could. Then I read Ramcharitmanas, then there is the Kritibasi Ramayana in Bengal, etc., etc. And with the Mahabharata also, I read many versions. So that was my primary research, to really, really know the story and see all the variations in which it appeared. For example, the Kamba Ramayana from the south is very different from Valmiki. Okay, the Adbhut Ramayana, which people say Valmiki wrote, but it's much more from the point of view of Sita as the main character. So, the research really gave me a lot of courage and encouragement to write my own version of the story. And I didn't want to change the major facts, but I did want to change the perspective and my understanding of who was the hero of this story. So I will do my primary research. Then I would do a secondary research, and that would be, and this is true of my historical novels also. I will do research in the facts of what happened, but also then lifestyle research. That's really important. What did people eat? What did people wear? All of those, what perfumes did women use at those times? For The Last Queen, which is the life of Maharani Jinda, Maharaja Ranjit Singh's youngest wife, like what would she cook for Maharaja Ranjit Singh? Because they both came from a very simple background, simple kind of peasant background. And so when he was tired of eating all those feasts, he would come to her and she would cook like how, her mother would cook. So what were those dishes that she would cook? So things like that. So first the facts, then the lifestyle. And then, of course, I had to think about women of that time, what would be allowed to them, what would not be allowed to them, how does my character break boundaries? So then thematic elements. I did thematic research. So I would break up my research into different areas. That just works for me.
Right.
The same with Uncommon Love. First, I got all the facts. Then I started going into the character motivations. Then I would ask little questions like, what did you eat at home? So, in Sudha's house, it was different. In Murthy's house, it was different. So when Sudha would cook something after marriage, she would make sambar. Murthy would say, wait, that's not how you make muli sambar. And she'd say, but it is. And that's how we make it in my house, because she came from North Karnataka, he came from South Karnataka. So it's just interesting. And you have to know these things, right? That's what brings a book alive. So
there was that whole across the river thing in that.
Sorry, to share, let me just finish this one thought.
Yes.
To really pull the reader in, you have to give the reader something they don't already know. So in my research, I have to figure out what is it that I can give the reader that they don't already know.
Perfect. I was just adding in saying there was that whole across the river idea, right? So there were two sides of the river, and they were from other sides. Each
Right,
family was from a different
The
side.
Tungabhadra
Yeah,
River.
yeah.
And
And it was even within Karnataka, there was these differences that people had, saying, "Huh, the people on the other side of the river are, not as good," kind of a thing.
right,
So that
right.
was interesting. Yeah,
Because
cool.
we wouldn't think that. We would think, oh, they are both Kannadigas, so they
Yeah,
should be getting
exactly.
along just fine. But Sudha said to me, no, not at all. So,
Great. So Shayoni's question on research is more or less answered. Low inspiration, also answered with writer's block. This one's interesting. Do you know the ending of the story, or do you let the story happen as you write?
yeah, that's a great question. To some extent, depending on what I'm writing, if I'm writing like a modern tale that I have created completely, like, Mistress of Spices, Sister of My Heart, Oleander Girl, I create the whole plot. I don't know what's going to happen at the end. I know kind of, but I allow the moments to unfold. From one conflict, the next conflict will occur. From one conflict, the solution to that conflict will occur. So it's, I don't know. Because if I try to fix that ahead of time, it'll become very wooden, right? It won't be, I don't know, organic. With stories like Palace of Illusions and Forest of Enchantments, and even The Last Queen, I mean, everybody already knows how those stories will end. So I don't think so much about the plot, but I think about how I'm going to present the plot, right? So through the character's eyes, the plot begins to look different. What I focus on through the character's eyes looks different. So for example, at the end of Palace of Illusions, I don't want to give it away in case anyone hasn't read it. But the end of Palace of Illusions is when the Pandavas and Draupadi have left, the world of everyday life behind, and they're climbing up. They're going on Mahaprasthan, the final journey, right? They're going up the Himalayas. And as everyone knows from the Mahabharata, Panchali will be the first to fall because, she's not as strong as the others. But what happens and what's going on in her mind as they're going on that journey and when she falls, that I created through my understanding of that character. So that's how, those two elements come together. What is known and what is plotted and what is the surprise element. And for me, always, character is at the heart. So, I feel that if a scene doesn't reveal something about the character, then something's missing there. If it's
I
just
had a
action, then it's not enough.
I had a question, which is, so you wrote Palace of Illusions in 2008. As a child, had you seen the Ramanand Sagar Mahabharat on Doordarshan?
Well, yeah, I hadn't seen them as a child because by then I was, older.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And I had already moved to the US, but I
Okay.
saw them in DVD form, right? I saw them as those tapes. So we would borrow those tapes from the Indian grocery and then we would watch them. So I did see them. Yeah.
So did that color the way you wrote the book? Do you think?
No, it didn't because, all right, I don't want to sound like an unpleasant person, but I would look at that. But I had already read I had already heard the stories. My grandfather had told me the stories. So they were in my imagination, right? And then later I read the books and they were in my imagination. And I had imagined them quite differently. So I would see let's say the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, and I would enjoy it as a spectacle, but in my head was a different version of the characters or even how I had imagined the scenes, right?
Absolutely. In fact, I saw that. I saw that in the sense, even in Palace of Illusions, like the way you describe Arjun and the Arjun that we had on TV. Arjun is much bigger than what the TV did, made him out to be. I just felt like all the characters, because they're just so humanized, they're somewhat reduced. They're not cosmic enough. They're not heroic enough as they can be in your imagination when you just reduce them to actual people, actual actors on the screen. So yeah, and I can kind of see what you're saying, read your writing. So makes a lot of sense. But sorry, I should not
No,
be asking my
thank you,
own
thank you.
question.
No, and that's what I would say to our writers here today in our audience.
Mhm.
Always trust your imagination, right? Your imagination is bigger than what you think it can be. Just kind of lean into your imagination. Allow your imagination to flower. And that's
That's
when you will create things that are original.
that's fantastic. Thank you so much. We will carry that. Next question: how do you write the dialogue in a novel with characters who have never spoken English? That's an interesting one.
With characters,
Who have never spoken English. So, like even in Independence, I mean, you can imagine all those people are actually speaking in Bangla, but in the
yeah.
book, obviously, they are speaking in English. So,
Yeah. So, I think my advantage, as with most of us here today, is that English is not my mother tongue. I mean, it's my school language. It's what I grew up with in school. It's my academic language, and I write in it because it is my academic language. But the language of my heart, the language that's in the back of my head that I hear, is Bengali, is Bangla, right? So that gives me an advantage, I think. It particularly gives me an advantage when I read some of the work, and I don't want this to sound wrong, but when I read the work of um, like maybe Indian American writers who have never spoken the mother tongue, but now they're writing characters who are, I don't know, village people or something, and they don't have the intonations correct. They don't have how they would speak. But I feel blessed because I grew up the first 20 years of my life in India, and I was always speaking Bangla at home and with my
mm,
friends. So I
mm,
have that the rhythm, the diction, all of that in the back of my mind. And you know, I always try to think about how would my characters, if they are speaking, how would they speak in their native language? Even when I'm, I was writing The Last Queen, where they would have spoken in Punjabi. So I thought that, but then I did some, um, I don't know, connaissance, I guess you could say, where I asked my Punjabi friends, I would say, well, what would you say in your language? How would, like, there's a portion where Maharani Jinda is talking to her older brother. And I'm like, how would she talk to him? What would she say?
mm.
And then I managed to bring that into the writing. So I think if we are writing characters who are Indian, then as far as possible, we should have at least some Indian language in the back of our heads, and preferably that Indian language so that it can
Right.
be really authentic. And that really helps. I think that's kind of important. Now,
Sure.
can people never write about a culture that they have not grown up in? They can, but you have to do a lot more careful research. Like when I write about um, United States, and I'm writing about people who are not Indian who are living in the United States, I always make it a point to have a reader from that cultural background read those sections and tell
Mm,
me, did I get it right? Is this what they would think? Is this how they would react? And then, be willing to listen to them. So, yeah.
sure. Great. We're almost out of time. And by the way, just so you all know, it's midnight where Chitra is right now. So she's literally, it's 12 in the night and she's taken time out for us. So again, I'm really thankful. A couple of last questions. KK has a fun question. He's saying, since the book is ending with them going for IPO, can we expect part two to the Uncommon Love?
Yeah. Well, I have also learned never say never because one doesn't know what is going to come up. But really, we were interested, all of us, in this part of the story because after Infosys goes public, the story also becomes public, right?
Public. That's true.
There are many sources where you can read up on that story. And they have
Yeah.
done many interviews after that about that later part of their life. So the reason I was so interested in An Uncommon Love is it's the joy of telling a story that hasn't been told. It's the joy of uh, discovering something. And I think that just wouldn't happen in the second part. So right now, I think this is it. Then latter part of the story is well known enough to other people.
All right, great. Well, we are only through about half the questions, but I'm gonna call it a night now for you.
Yeah, and I wanted
Um,
to tell people that, as you probably know, I'm on social media. I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and I hope some of you will follow me there. And then every once in a while, I ask, like, do you have writerly questions, or do you have questions about my books? So then you can write in your questions, and I do try to answer them. So
Great.
yes,
Thank you
I
so
hope
much.
that
Thank you
our
so much.
time is ending, but our conversation doesn't have to.